Where am I? Oh, yes, here I am. Okay, so my name is Stephen Maller, and I'm the CTO, Chief Technical Officer of the IIC. And I want to begin. If you look at the screen here, you can see a list of things that I just want to touch on. I intend to be quite brief and leave time for questions. And then I'm going to find some rice staffel, which will be lovely. I ate Japanese last night, a wonderful kaiseki. It was marvelous. In any event, the Object Management Group was founded 28, 29, 30, I forget, years ago. Its initial product was something called Corba, the Common Object Request Broker, or something like that. And it has since grown and transmogrified in all sorts of ways. Doing modeling things like the Unified Modeling Language, which I was involved in way back in '99, would you believe? It has done things like model-driven architecture, another model-driven thing, and a number of other standards in this area, quite a lot. Over time, it has gone more vertical, and that seems to be a fairly common pattern. So we have retail groups and finance groups and healthcare groups and so on and so forth. But the OMG is both a holding non-profit company and a collection of programs. So the Object Management Group, as I say, was founded 30-ish years ago. It has always been doing standards. It regards itself as a standards development body, and it has 4 programs underneath it. One of them is still called OMG, and it does standards. Another one is based around software quality. Third one based around I think it's called the Cloud Council, based around cloud computing. Those last 2 are quite small. And then the biggest program is, hooray, IIC. We were founded 5 years ago by 5 global companies, GE, Intel, AT&T, Cisco, and IBM. I think that's 5. And their goal was to accelerate the development of the industrial internet. I want to emphasize the idea of it being global. One of our very active members is Fujitsu. It is represented on our steering committee by a Frenchman. He lives in California. That's pretty typical. That's the way these things go. We have over 200 members. At one point, in the peak of inflated expectations, we had over 250. I think it's about 220 at the moment. And they vary quite a lot, from large companies through to, actually, we have one company which is 2 people. And they do an incredible amount of work, as well as actually make enough money to live, which is quite amazing. On the call, we have Howard Cragel, who is Chief of Staff with no staff. There's a long and complicated story, best told over beer for that. He's going to be moving into co-innovation as of like 2 weeks ago, and that's why he's on this call. And I'll explain what that is in just a moment. Richard Soley is the chairman of the Object Management Group. A gentleman named Bill Hoffman is the president. So those guys basically run the company. But Richard is also the executive director of IIC, and therefore sits on its steering committee. The activities vary all over the place. We have a technology working group, which is kind of a grab bag, digital twin, vocabulary, architecture, innovation, ecosystem. It's quite weird. Security, which is very focused on, guess what, security, but also on bringing things into a larger context, into so-called trustworthiness, which I think is a word invented by NIST. Actually, I think we both invented it at the same time. And it covers privacy, security, reliability, availability, all those kinds of things that bring together both the information technology and the operational technology, because they have quite different emphases. We have a business strategy group that is focused on what you need to do to start projects. We have a group which is looking at marketing. It has a number of subgroups which will be moving around as time passes, including manufacturing, automotive, a smart factory that's manufacturing, I suppose. We're spinning one up on supply chains and healthcare and a number of other things of that general ilk, as well as doing proper marketing things like thought leadership, sending out press releases, all that kind of stuff. So those are the kinds of things that are going on. The last group is the testbed working group. So I'm moving down now into the third high-level bullet. I just stop quickly for any questions. Oh, I like that. Noise is off, as they say in Shakespeare. Okay, I'll just carry on. When the IIC was founded, there was a difference of opinion between the founders as to whether we should have at most 5 so-called grand challenges, which are modeled after the kinds of things that the US government does, or we should just have a whole bunch of test beds. We never actually resolved that. We've ended up with a variety of test beds that cover some really quite interesting stuff, down to, well, they're really a marketing thing. And so I'm not too excited about those. I'd say we have about 26 at the moment that are active. We have decommissioned some because they finished, or decommissioned some because they haven't done anything. I'd say we have had about 32 overall. A test bed is a scaled down real world implementation. I'll just give you a couple of examples. One of them is on a factory floor, track and trace it's called. What it does is that it tracks, hence the name, and traces activity of power tools on the factory floor. So if you apply this much torque at this location and this time on the airframe, that is recorded. And then if there's a problem, you know where to go back to. We had some interesting results from that, one of which is that at a large European airframe manufacturer that I'm not allowed to name, we're spending up to half of our time looking for tools, which is quite frightening, but does correspond to the amount of time that I spend looking for my keys, so I suppose it's fair enough. We also have put together a proposal for a standard that has actually gone to the object management group, OMG, to standardize sensors and devices so that you can access tools from many different vendors. So that's a kind of interesting one. Not too interesting to you. So here's another one. This is based in Cork. It's called Infinite. It's actually a selection of use cases, smart city use cases. One of them is a so-called blue light, which is essentially to tell ambulances where to go. So if, for example, you have a flood, it's no good pulling out your phone and saying, where's the nearest hospital? The answer is across that bridge, because that bridge is no longer there. So this provides information on hospitals that are accessible, the current load there, so that you know, well, if I take another 5 minutes to go to this other place, I'm more likely to be seen than if I go to the very nearest one because they're completely overloaded, that kind of thing. And it's technologically not very exciting. It's actually pretty easy. But it did yield an interesting result, namely that the ambulance drivers almost went on strike. Why, you might ask? Because they could be tracked, and where they were was at coffee shops. So we got some very interesting results from that. Rather than firing them or putting up with the strike or whatever, there are now some spaces reserved outside coffee shops near to dangerous intersections where ambulances will park. And then when there's a problem, they don't have very far to go. They don't need to drive into the city making that awful noise, and then off they go. So we have a whole number of these. They're in different areas. Manufacturing and energy are big ones. We don't really have any smart city ones, but we would want them. And that's really the third bullet. But first, I need to finish up bullet number 2. We started with test beds. And we have an approval process because we didn't want people just to turn up with a couple of PowerPoint slides and say there. We wanted to make sure that at the very minimum, they had a business impact, a societal impact, and they had looked at security in some way. The fastest one that ever got through the process was 10 weeks. The longest was 10 months. That's simply too long. So where we are now is very similar to where the OMG was after a few years of its life, namely moving from technology, core bud, that kind of thing, more towards verticals. So instead of thinking about all these technological things you can do, OMG thinks about retail and finance and so on and so forth. So, of course, we're thinking about industrial things. So smart city is of interest, manufacturing is of interest, integrated transportation systems, those kinds of things. And we're now looking at, and this is the work that Howard is going to be overseeing, alternatives to test beds. One of them is a challenge. This is the idea that a end user, a smart city, let's say, the city of Portland, might come along and say, we have this problem, we want it solved, we're going to offer prize money, I don't know, 10K, let's say. We are going to announce the winner of this at some conference, the United States Smart City Annual Conference, let's say, and we'll pick the winner and announce that there, and then you get the prize and all sorts of stuff. And then we bring in technology sponsors who might put in a little bit more or put in facilities or whatever. But the idea is to identify a use case of interest to the end user and then cause something to get built. So this is quite early on. This is more ideation, getting to the point that you can specify what you want to build with what technology, rather than actually doing it, which is what a test bed is. A test drive comes at it from the other direction. This is technology provider focused. Here I am, I'm a company. I have these 8 products that do all these wonderful things in IIoT that might be helpful in smart cities. Here it is. If you have a use case, let's make that happen. So we're working on this at the moment. Howard is working feverishly as we speak, I'm sure, trying to figure out how best we can do this. But the underlying goal here is connecting with industry. And what we're looking for here is to beef up our smart cities test beds. You could help us a lot with that. Once we have defined challenges and test drives in more detail, of course, we'd be very interested in seeing you involved in those things. We'd like to see standards around this area, which IIC would not drive directly, but would work on requirements for them. And you should know also that we are partnered with Fira Barcelona, who runs an extremely large smart city event. It's the largest one in the world. We work with them on something called IoT Solutions World Congress, which is also the largest one in the world. We set up the program, but they are our best friends. And of course, that means that we have some way of talking with people to make that happen. So those are the things that we're thinking are helpful to us. And I think also it will be helpful to you because we have a whole lot of infrastructure set up. We have some ideas about how to do this. We've seen some things that worked and some things that didn't, and so it goes. So I'll stop there for a minute.
That's really helpful, Stephen. Can I ask a couple of questions?
Please do.
I'm sort of interested in what piece of this the way you were talking about it and the way we see it as well is that this is more about bringing the right parts together, and you've got the challenge between the innovation which happens well in a sort of fragmented environment, and the providing some sort of order and structure to the customers. And in this case, being cities, you actually want things like interoperability within services within a city and interoperability between cities, right? You don't want 2 different cities to have entirely different service infrastructures because it undermines the market opportunity, and it is very disruptive for citizens. How do you go about that kind of balance? Are you I could sort of ask it from a technical question, but actually it's more of a policy question, right? I mean, do you recommend in all your test beds that that there is a particular way in which IoT services are registered, and so is a service that's developed for an aircraft manufacturer can be used at a silicon manufacturer for how you communicate with equipment. So there's infrastructure there. How do you go about that at OMG, or is that something that you pass off to one of these standards bodies?
Well, there's two questions underneath this. One of them is the technical question of how do you identify commonalities across different industries. So, for example, you just talked about the semiconductor industry. Yeah, there are things in there, root of trust, provisioning of devices, and so on and so forth, that occur in several different industries. The other question is how do we go about ensuring that there is some commonality across the different members and the different customers? To use your specific example, two different cities with the same infrastructure. So answering the first question first, what you have to do obviously is to look across multiple industries. This is very hard because smart cities very well. We have people who are very good at manufacturing. Your terminology is completely different. So one of the things that IIC is trying to do is not spend its time thinking so much about the standards, but rather looking across those different verticals to identify things that might be used in common. So we can identify some very obvious things around provisioning, security, those kinds of things. But as we come to higher order things such as graceful degradation, how is that different in a factory from a city or an airplane? Well, maybe we shouldn't use that example. Let's say a connected vehicle. There must be some common patterns that we can identify, and we're doing some work on that. So that's that question. To answer the second question, we can't force a city, or more generally any one of our members, to use a particular technology. But the way in which our test beds are set up, and this, by the way, does not apply to the challenges, not exactly the same. There are some differences. Anyway, in a test bed, if I were to come to the IIC and say, I propose this test bed, excuse me. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so if a company comes to the IIC and says, I propose this test bed, then they own that test bed. It's their IP, it might be their site, it might be their technology, and they can choose how they want to do things. And if you come along and say, I want to use a different technology, they may say, well, that's lovely, but the whole purpose of this, from our point of view, and we own it, is we want to test out this specific technology, or we want to use our technology, or whatever it is. So we cannot and do not police any of that. What we try to do instead is move quickly so that people can get things deployed, see what works and what doesn't work. And then, as usual, there will be certain, if you like, winners, where certain platforms become more common across different places.
Do you find that, the terminology that NIST has used here are things like pivotal points of interoperability. It sounds like you're describing similar things, right? Where obviously what you want to do is to have the minimum number of places where people have to conform, and the maximum number of areas where they can innovate and add value.
Yes.
And do you have a situation where you can get enough momentum? Let's say, for example, you have 4 or 5 cities that have defined what identity means, Now there may be a lot of mechanisms behind that, but there's probably an interface that if it was caused to be standard, if it was caused to be common, if it was agreed to, would allow an individual to move between municipalities without having to re-register. That there could be some form of identity. How I assume you have something similar with smart city services. I mean, with smart services around IoT, you've got a device that might come into an environment and needs to register itself, and you need to know that that device is what it says it is and does what it says it does. So you got something similar. Have you tackled that problem, or do you just say, hey, if Boeing does it one way and Airbus does it another way and Intel does it another way and GE does it another way, that's fine? Or do you try and find a way to have those recognition mechanisms be common?
We try and find a way that those recognition mechanisms can be common. And this is something that's very important to understand about IIC. This market is pretty competitive. This is not all about fighting each other over bits of the pie. It's about growing the pie. And so there is definitely ways in which we can grow that market faster if we have standards that work across multiple different places, in your example, cities. IIC, though, is driven by its members. So what that would mean is that if yourself and your members and the folks at, let's say, Portland get together. I live in San Diego. I know they have a lot of, well, I supposedly live in San Diego. I know they have a smart city program. I can connect you up with them, and you no doubt know many more other people. And if we can bring them into the ecosystem, it's obviously a benefit to all of those people and the vendors to come up with a single standard.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Good. Other questions? I mean,
we start, our external presentation of ourselves is always, we're doing these test beds, we're doing these experiments, we're gathering requirements, we're sending them to standards development bodies, but actually the first step is ecosystem.
No, that's great. That's very helpful and answers the question well. Other questions for Stephen from the group?
This is Yasunori joining from Tokyo, and I wonder if I can ask two questions actually. So I'm actually pretty much familiar with the IIC because I'm working for NEC, and NEC is also a member, and also we got a couple of test beds already approved in the IIC. And my first question is, I just would like to have a general view or landscape of smart city presence or visibility within the IIC community. Is it growing in the last couple of years or otherwise?
I would say that it's growing, but I would also say that we're seeing it in smaller pieces. For example, one of our test beds is urban water supply. We are very involved in things like connected vehicles. Both of those have a huge impact on the city. The test bed that I mentioned earlier, the infinite test bed, has a number of use cases that are certainly growing. I know that test bed is relatively active. I would say that it's growing, but it's always driven by the members, right? Right now, a lot of our members are very interested in automotive, and they're very interested in factories. But just 2 months ago, suddenly, healthcare got extremely active. So we would work with you, we staff would work with you to get more people thinking about smart cities, finding ways in which we can accelerate this for you so that you can get things going.
Oh, great to learn that. And also, actually, that leads to me the other question I wanted to ask. If I understand correctly, the structure, the activity of the IIC is such that you form some working groups according to some verticals of interest, such as retail and so forth, to trying to give approval to the proposals. But whereas the smart city is actually the place or substance that cross-cut type of interaction take place among those verticals. And so do you believe that IIC structure, organizational structure of the working groups still has some mechanism that would allow or encourage such a cross sector interactions, which has a very close connection with the how to come up with the commonality of the platform and so forth to be applicable to smart city.
Yes, I do. That's precisely why we're trying to move away from test beds only, closer to the beginning of the chain and closer to industry users, so that we can find commonalities and cross-sector stuff. That is absolutely what we want. That is precisely the direction that we're trying to get to. I really think I'd go further. I'd say that's why we're here. If we mean to accelerate the development of the industrial internet, which is our mission, then the big gains are going to come when we have cooperation, interaction between different sectors. It's 30 years ago when Sir Tim Berners-Lee invented the URL. All he wanted to do was to share documents within an organization. And here we are holding a conversation across the globe using that kind of technology. My phone is, beeping off in the corner here, uploading stuff. It does all sorts of things that were never, ever considered. My airline is sending me a message that says that my upgrade has come through. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. None of those things were considered in 1989, and that's where we are, in my opinion, with the industrial internet. We're getting asset efficiency already. That's a good thing. We're beginning to see new business models, such as things like Uber, ride-hailing services. But that's just the beginning. We have much more stuff to do when we start working across the different sectors. And that's why we have asked Howard to be the single person that looks across these things to find those commonalities and to bring them forward so that we can get things going more quickly.
Great, thank you. I'm very happy to learn that. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions?
Yeah. This is Sako from Nest. By the way, I just have a comment, and it's not even comment. I'm extremely happy to hear this direction the IIC is taking. IIC is obviously, one of the main forces in enabling IoT in general. And then I have been obviously great, all the good things to say about IIC. One thing that I always had in the back of my mind was IIC has been still very much driven by members, which is perfectly fine. But because of that, a lot of the activities of IIC are defined by their existing businesses. So meaning, yes, if it's an automotive company, then they obviously is paying attention to automotive, and that's their focus. But because of that, as we all discussed today, a lot of the projects and test beds are very much just siloed and focused on very specific outcome and specific sectors. And that is good. I'm not saying that's bad. It's just that at some point for the industrial internet, which is your mission, to really, really be ubiquitous beyond what you have today, all these different companies have to sort of think about 2 steps ahead, and not just their business today, but what's going to happen in 5 years and 10 years. At that point, the business they have today may not be the same business in 10 years from now. So, and then at that point, I assume, and I really hope that all these different businesses and sectors can merge, and that becomes innovation, source of innovation for new type of businesses, that different, things can come together. So I'm really glad to see this direction the IIC is taking, and I believe that's exactly type of the things that myself and also the Global City Teams challenge that GCTC that this is working on, and also this open commons and all this philosophically. I think I'm really glad that we are really now, we really can find a common grounds and we can work together.
Yes, I agree. We have as I said early, we have a business strategy group, and it has 2 things going on. One of them is an innovation group that's looking at bringing in speakers with different ideas that we can push forward. We also are working with academics. We had a very successful meeting at the Cork Institute of Technology last month, and we've kind of revivified the academic task group to bring in new ideas and new ways of thinking about things. So yes, I absolutely see what you're saying there. Of course, it's hard to get people to do that, but that's okay. That's why we're here.
Sorry.
I understand completely.
Excuse me, this is Yasunori again. And if I understand correct, now the activity of the testbed approval not only goes on to those product level maturity, but you also allow early phase, a preliminary phase, concept level test beds to be discussed within IIC. Because I'm aware NEC recently, the research folks in NEC proposed the artificial intelligence speaking to each other to harmonize on reaching towards the agreement among artificial intelligence, which should be very important in the future. Of course, this is still in the research phase and not at the product phase. But I was very happy to see the IIC community allowing this kind of discussion to be brought up to this international conversation. Because as Soku points out, this kind of thing, of course, probably not just about this kind of thing, but also in the IoT directions would lead to, meet with Soku's expectation.
Yeah, that's why if you look at the screen, the third bullet down here says co-innovation program. What we're trying to do is to step away from the end of the project phase before go to market and go back to ideation and understanding how we innovate and how we bring things together and make things easier to get things started so that we can see where they go without a heavy approval process. I still think that it's helpful to maintain that approval process for people that are further down the line, but we want to help support our members from ideation to deployment. Do we have any other questions?
Hi, Stephen. This is Scott Lewis.
Yep.
On the IIC page, there are some kind of links to OpenFog and the Linux Foundation. How do you work with the other kind of open organizations? Okay,
there are several things going on here. Let me start not with Linux, but with Eclipse. Eclipse was once upon a time a program of OMG, and it was spun off as a separate entity. We have 40 liaisons at the moment, including with W3C. I'm pretty certain that Linux Foundation is there. We do have a liaison with Eclipse. I'm certain of that, and they are members. So what we do is that we set up simple agreements that allow for transfer of documents, just clarifying who owns what and all that kind of stuff. Lawyers, shudder. But once we get that set up, then we try to get people working together on those kinds of things. In respect to OpenFog, we joined forces with them at the end of January. They have I should say had, I suppose. They have an interest, of course, in fog. They have a regional team in China and in Japan. And we basically are now working together as a single entity. That's why if you look at my business card, it says IIC now with OpenFog. And we go from there. So there's three things going on there, right? One of them is separate organizations with which we have liaisons. There's OpenFog, which is now a part of us. And then there are organizations that are kind of separated, but nevertheless, we have good relationships with them. And we do that also with Chinese Academy of Information and Communication Technologies. And as you know, they have a lot of smart city stuff going on. And then in Germany with Platform Industry 4.0, but they're manufacturing, not smart cities.
Okay. And also, Does the IIC kind of host or kind of support any projects that are separate from the projects of the individual members?
We do run various workshops, typically with our liaisons. We do intend to help people work with different projects, but IIC needs to facilitate only, and not to own or to drive. So, for example, this morning I had a chat with some people who offer ideation workshops and also access to government money, which is just amazing. And they are a member, and they are willing to work with other members to help them do that. So what IIC will do in that case is to make it possible and easy for them to do that. And then we step aside because the people who are actually building the systems and investing millions in terms of time and money and all the other things that it takes to get these things going, they need to own it.
So how do you support them in kind of those projects?
Well, we do things like provide mailing lists. We do things like advertise it across our members. We have something called the Resource Hub, hub.iiconsortium.org, which contains an ecosystem directory. So you can go there and say, I'm looking for somebody to help me with analytics. There it is. And we help host meetings, all of those kinds of things. But what we do not do is say, well, we're going to do a smart city project now, and then get our members to do the work. That's not going to work.
Okay. Thanks.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. We are a service to our members to help them do what they need to do, and they own it. So what I'd like to do in the remaining time is just talk about two other things, because IIC was the focus of this because it's smart cities, but I wanted to talk about the object management group as a standards program. As I said, that's been going for nearly 30 years. The standards are very widely adopted, Corba, for example, UML for another. They're relatively quick. We can get OMG can get a standard out in about 18 months. You'd be lucky to get anything out of ISO in 5 years. And we have a process.
Sorry.
Oh, wait, I forgot you're recording. Yes. I think I just said what was on my mind. We're also very focused on adoption. I won't go through the process, but for a standard to be adopted, it needs to go through an architecture board on which I sat to ensure that it technically is consistent with other standards. And there also need to be several companies that agree to implement the standard if adopted. The purpose here is to get stuff that works and not to end up in a situation where we just got this pile of paper and nobody's using it. So we're very focused on adoption. And then in respect to IIC particularly, we don't do standards, but we do feed requirements in that direction. So OMG can do stuff. So if you're interested in that, I'm very happy to tell you more. I have a counterpart in OMG standards, name of Larry Johnson, who undoubtedly will be happy to talk to you. But I did want to do that because I know it came up in the discussion about who are you and how do all these things fit. And then the last thing I'd like to talk about, and then I'll turn it over to final questions and Wilfred to talk amongst yourselves, as they say, is just the kind of thing that we do. I said that we have these different programs. Yes, we do. Howard and I work exclusively for the IIC program, but the likes of Richard Soley, who is the CEO of the company, he covers all of those things. Similarly, good grief, people keep coming and going. Similarly, we have people who do things like set up meetings, reserve hotels, get meeting space. We have email servers so that we can maintain mailing lists and the like. We use a particular platform that actually we have two different platforms, one in OMG and one in IIC, that allows you to do things like store documents, calendar, email, all of those kinds of things. Those services are provided to all of the programs uniformly. So you can see kind of the top and the bottom, if you like, are focused on providing services, and then each of the 4 programs does its thing. I just wanted to tell you that so that you know how we do things. IIC has quarterly meetings globally. The last one was in Ireland. The next one is in Southern California, the one after in Sydney, for the second summer of the year. Hooray! We do teleconferences. The security people meet weekly. Some groups meet bi-weekly. I'm sure that our friends in Japan will be glad to know that the working groups have monthly meetings that are Asia friendly. So you don't need to be up at 1 o'clock in the morning, and so on. So that's it. Any questions on anything else as you've had time to think about this? Howard, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I just wanted to say, I mean, it was a very good update. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Stephen. No, I have nothing to add. Once I find the mute button. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
No problem. Yes. Okay. Well, in that case, Howard and I will sign off, and you can talk amongst yourselves. Wilfred has our email addresses. You can always reach us at familyname@iiconsortium.org. I'm Stephen Meller, and Howard is Kradgel, Kradjel. And we'll be happy to answer any questions that you have as you think about this.
Thanks so much. I think this was really helpful, and a good sort of basis for framing how we might be able to work together on this. So thank you. I appreciate it. Does anybody have any other discussions they want here? I think this is good. There's no meeting next week. I think the next meeting, I'm hoping it will be Splunk. Corey had agreed to give us an update, and I think then we can get into discussions about how to form up the organization here and start to move in a direction of establishing the platform itself. So any questions from anybody, any requests or other components we want to talk about? Let's call it a day then. This was really good. I'll have the Zoom video up on the slide up on the website very shortly. So if there are other people you want to see this, feel free to share, and we'll talk again in a couple of weeks. Thanks, folks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.